Hey guys, what's up? Green Machine Sam back with another video, and today we have a very special video. I finally have decided to record this and get this done, so let's get into things. If you haven't seen in recent news, the Chicago Bears have been looking at building a new stadium for probably the last, 2 or 3 years at this point. I think it was right around the time Eberflus came in, if not a little bit earlier than that. But let's get things underway. And as you know, as you can probably read the title, Chicago needs a dome. Bears fans are delusional. I'm not trying to call anybody out. I'm just stating what I've been seeing. Now the script is a little old. I did create this probably about a month ago, and I just never got around to recording it. I never figured out what I wanted to do for the video aspect, all that fun stuff. But I wanted to make this video. This is something I had done, and I didn't ever plan on making a video about. But then with some of the recent stuff going on and stuff like that, I wanted to make a video about this. I had done some of this work previously before this, a couple years ago, back when Matt Nagy was coaching. And then I went back and redid all my research just to try to get a full view of what was going on. With the recent news that the Chicago Bears have moved focus on building a new stadium on the lakefront property right next to Soldier Field, and the recent renderings of what the stadium could possibly look like, you have Chicago social media teams all across the country coming out of the woodworks talking about the possibilities in the renderings. Now, of course, this is all just speculation, of course, and just ideas. Of course, we are years, if not probably closer to a decade, away from this project being complete, if they get moving on it anytime soon. The one thing I personally took a problem with wasn't whether or not you liked the idea of the stadium on the lakefront next to Soldier Field, or if you like the rendering of it. I know one common theme I've heard from us fans was parking capacity still didn't look to be upgraded or at this, what it should be at, as well as seat capacity. That's one thing I was particularly looking at, because tickets for Bears games are so expensive. Like, anytime I look at going to a Bears game, it almost makes sense for me to go up to Minnesota and watch it at the Minnesota Vikings field, because it's just as cheap to go to Soldier Field as it is for me to take the extra long trip up to Minnesota and watch the Vikings versus Bears game at Minnesota. Like, it just makes almost more sense for me to go up to Minnesota based off of how expensive Soldier Field is, the problems with parking, all that fun stuff. The thing I am most upset about is all these fans complaining that it would be a dome. And that's something that I don't particularly like. And that the Bears would be losing the Windy City vibe and their home field advantage of the cold coming off the lake, which I also believed in for a time, but as I grew older, I got the suspicion that wasn't as big of a deal as some made it out to believe. Now, of course, I checked this years ago. Like I've already stated, I checked this back in about the Matt Nagy era. I think it was around then, and I just didn't believe it. And I went back 10 years, and to my surprise, we didn't have a winning record during that time, but still. And for your guys' information, I'm going to be looking at November, December, and January games, including playoffs and stuff like that. So let's get into things. Now, of course, I checked this years ago if we actually played better and won more games at home during the cold. So I did just that, went back 10 years. And to my surprise, we didn't have a winning record during that time. But I do understand that we had some very bad teams during that time, with the Mark Trestman years and John Fox years. So there's some benefit of the doubt had to be given. So with a ton of Bears fans saying we don't need a dome, we don't want a dome, dome is bad for the monsters of the Midway and the Windy City of Chicago, I wanted to go back and look at the last 20 years and give us a real look as to whether or not we play better at home in the Windy City during cold temps. So I first decided to gather all home November, December, and January games played. So we started with the 2003 season, in which no roof believers would come out on top because Chicago would go combined 4-1 at home. Through those months, especially considering they went 7-9 on the year, 4-1 during those months is very good. Now, if we stop there, they would have a winning percentage of 80. Very, very good. But let's move on. 2004, they had 4 games at home through the 3 months that they went 1-3, just winning just 25% of their games. It was a bad season for the Bears as they went 5-11 under new head coach Lovie Smith. 2005 came in a resurgence again by the Bears, going 4-1 and 11-5 on the year, so back to the norm as it appears. 2006, they slipped a little, but when they did win, they were important games. They went 3-2. That was the Super Bowl year. They also went 13-3. Unfortunately, not looking great if 2 of your 3 losses came in cold weather games at home. In 2007, they had a pretty good year in the cold and made most of those games going 3-1. In a bad Super Bowl slump, finishing the year 7-9 and last in the division. So not a great go of it. So through the first 5 years, they went a combined 15-8 in November, December, and January home games, winning just over 65% of their games in those months. It's very good, and it should be the reason why Bears fans don't want a dome. So it's understandable, but this was 15 years ago. Let's keep going. Going 9-7 and 4-1 through cold games, coming back to form and pushing us down the right path. 2009 and 2010, they went a combined 7-5, still winning cold games hand over fist, but nothing special. Also, yes, I am applying home playoff games, so as everyone is well aware. Also, I'm making the script, and I just realized I did 21 years, but 2003 actually helps the no-dome believers, so I'm going to leave it in for now. In 2011 and 2012 is when we see our first real dip, going 3-5. This is also near the end of the old guard in Lovie Smith in Chicago. Still a 60% win percentage as we cross the 10-year mark. It's still incredible, and looks like the Bears do have a reason to go no dome with a mark of 29-19, but definitely a dip down to 14-11 with one big playoff loss in there hurts even more. 13-14 are the Mark Trestman years, and if you ask any Bears fans, they will probably say these are the worst years of their life. These were fucking terrible years, by the way, and this really sucks as I'm looking back on it because I started watching football, like getting deep into football about 2011. So I had 2 decent years with Lovie Smith, and then all of a sudden I have Mark Trestman and John Fox coming up. Not particularly great. Yeah, that was a very bad time. But yeah, if you ask any of the other Bears fans, this was probably the worst time of their lives. Losing all the big key vets, some guys retiring, some guys just moving on, and so on and so forth from the 2000s and those early 2010 teams. We see another big dip going 4-5 under Mark Trestman in those cold games. Mark would later be replaced by John Fox after those seasons, coming off his Bronco days, where he would see the biggest slip in cold games going 2-11. Now, it's not all on John. The team was in a very bad state when he came here. He was never expected to right the ship or be the future. Over this 5-year period, the team would plummet to a total of 6-16 in cold weather games and a 25-53 in total record over that time. So it was a very bad time. Like I said, these were probably some of the worst years, and it really sucked that, I started watching football. I started paying attention to understanding football in 2011 when I was just over 11 years old. But I never really I never got a full advantage of the Lovie Smith era. And then, my first like fully deep dives are Mark Trestman and John Fox. It really sucked. Like I said, he was never expected to right the ship. He was never expected to be the future coach. In my belief system, I think he was just a kind of bridge guy, a guy that was just supposed to come in, probably lose games, get him, in the rebuilding column. But next is the Matt and Ryan era. Now, the reason why I call it the Matt and Ryan era, if you haven't already noticed, if you were not a Bears fan, is because we have Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, and now we have Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles. So, relatively close names, just in terms of, the Matt being the coach, Ryan being the GM, and both the Ryans even have an R and P as their first and last initial. But both coaches have had good and incredibly bad years, and that feels like an understatement, so I'll lay them out. 2018, we went 4-1. 2019, we went 3-1. In 2020, we went 1-4 on the incredible collapse of the Matt Nagy era. 2021, we went 1-3. 2022, we went 0-6. And 2023, we went 4-0. So there's not a great look for the Mats going 13-15 over this time period. Now, Eberflus will have a chance to get us back on track, getting anywhere from 4 to 6 cold games. I don't remember exactly how many we're going to get this season, but still 4 to 6 home games, which in this previous season was a good section for him. So you may ask, where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us with a 49% win percentage. Or, well, that's rounded up. It's a 0.489 win percentage. If we keep the 2003 season, but since we are supposed to be looking only at the previous 20 seasons, we end up with a 44-49 record, finishing with a .473 win rate in those games that are played between November, December, and January. But like I said, if we add the 2003 season, I did include it in the early analysis. it will bring us to 48 and 50 in those months, which I think either way proves the Windy City does not need a dome on the lakefront property. If we do still decide to go with a lakefront property, of course. I think if we don't go with a lakefront property, I don't think there will be any question of whether or not we'll get a dome. I think it'll be a guarantee. I think the only reason why there's even a consideration of not getting a dome is because of the lakefront property and the Bears possibly wanting to retain some of that history of the Chicago Bears playing in cold weather and all that. Now, of course, a whole ton changes with how the stadium is built as well. Now, if you have windows that can move or open, then maybe for home games they can open them to let a cold draft in and maybe fuck with the other team. But the dome gives Chicago more opportunities to host events, concerts, the Super Bowl, big bowl games for college, and whatever else we can fit in there. You know, possibly high-level NBA games if the Bulls ever get their shit back on track. You know, I'm not saying the Bears particularly have their shit on track. I'm just saying it could be a possibility. Or if the Blackhawks ever return to greatness as well, that could also be a very cool thing to see. Maybe them playing in a larger stadium. I do understand plans still have to be approved and whatnot, and parking and seating still need major improvements. And I think that's probably I still think that's the major thing for most normal fans. I think a lot of normal and casual fans and people that just like the Bears and aren't like diehards, like, woo, Bears! I think those guys would probably rather have a dome as well. And I would assume, like myself, I think parking needs improved. I think seating needs improved. I think there needs to be a better way of being able to get into the game for relatively cheap. Every time I look at a game, it's just fucking outrageously expensive. Like I stated before, it's almost more cost effective for me to head up to... I know last year I looked at it and I was like, it makes more financial sense to go up to Minnesota and watch at the Viking Stadium. I know a couple years ago, it made more sense to go to Cleveland and to Indy to go watch them, which is kind of outrageous. Just saying, you know, and for anybody's peace of mind, I live, you know, a couple hours away from Chicago. So it's not like I'm super far away and I'm going to have to drive long distance anyway. It's closer to drive to Chicago than those other places. It just made more financial sense to drive to other places. I do understand that, you know, plans still will have to be approved and improved, but I think the whole cold front from the lake is a home field advantage just doesn't work anymore. But that's just me. We're going to handle one last thing before we get out of here. Let's look just at December and January games, because those games are more of a freezing and super cold games than anything, as the average temp in Chicago for November is about 40 degrees over the last 20 or 21 years, and December is about 30.3. Now, of course, as you get later in those months, it's going to get colder, and the earlier games in those months are going to be a little bit warmer, just how weather works and the weather system works. January is 18.4 degrees. These are all Fahrenheit degrees, by the way, just in case somebody from a different country is watching. This is Fahrenheit, so it is a very low temperature for us, which are all still relatively cold, and this is coming from a fat dude that enjoys the cold more than anything. I love wearing hoodies and sweatpants and just being able to chill out in the cold and not have to do anything, whereas I hate the summer and I hate the heat. Whenever summer's around, you'll see me less inside than when it's fucking 15 degrees out. I'm being completely honest. I've always been in the boat where it's like, the cold weather isn't bad, you can bundle up more, you can always put more gear on, you can always find more stuff to be able to put on your body and make yourself warmer. When it's hot out, you can only get it naked so much before the cops start getting cold, right? But still. So December ends the same as everything else so far. 2003 to 2023 is a record of 26 and 20, or over the last 20 years was 24 and 27, with a .491 win percentage or a .471 win percentage, whichever way you want to look at it. Still a negative win-loss. January gets even worse, believe it or not. Now, I know most of these will be playoff games. A lot of January games in the future are going to be regular season games as well as playoff games, but still, you still have to play the guy in front of you. You made the playoffs. You were still good teams in those years. You have to go out and beat whoever's in front of you. And unfortunately, the Bears went into combined 2-5 in January games, so a .285 win percentage. Crazy. Now, I will preface this by saying over the last 21 or 20 years or so, whenever you decide to make the deadline for the Bears, they have just not been a good team. Like I've stated before, they've endured some of the worst seasons that I've been alive for and that I have personally watched. Over this time, they went a combined 159 and 180 or 152 and 171. So they lose about 7 wins and 9 losses over this time period. So it isn't like they are a very successful franchise at this very moment. They have owned multiple top 5 picks, multiple top 10 picks. One last thing I want to say is this. I'm a Chicago Bears fan through and through. I'm not some outside source spewing this info to get Chicago to build a dome because I don't want my team to play in the cold. I've always been a Bears fan and will continue to do so until I can't, or until they cease to exist. These are just my opinions. They may not be a fact, and of course, you could do much deeper dives than this, right? This doesn't prove that the lakefront doesn't provide a bigger help than I can see, and our teams have been bad, so that may counteract the advantages of the wind and the cold coming off the lake. So that could affect us and our players, or they couldn't. But it just really changes how you look at things when you see that we do have a negative record in those games over the last 20. Right, like I said, I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just stating the facts. We have not had a cold front advantage. Yes, the teams have been bad during this time, but still, one thing I do want to say is we've had guys that can throw the football in cold weather. We've had guys that can run the football in cold weather. We had one of the greatest kickers of all time in Robbie Gould, in my opinion, at minimum a top 10 kicker. I'd have to go look at stats and all that fun stuff. But Robbie Gould was a super solid kicker. Was a super, super solid kicker. At one point was probably one of the best kickers in the entire league. And it was hard on him to kick in Chicago. So it's just, it's very different. You know, we've had a guy like Jay Cutler, who, in my opinion, had one of the best arm talents in the entire league, just never really gave enough of a fuck about football or Chicago. We've had Justin Fields, who I think has an incredible arm, just didn't put it all together in Chicago. You know, we've had guys that can make plays in this cold weather, that can survive this cold weather. And we just haven't won. Now, of course, like I said, could be because the teams are bad and so on and so forth and all this and that, but still. I just don't like the fact that a lot of people are like, we need to keep the Windy City vibe. We need to keep it because it gives us an advantage. If you go back and look at the stats, if you go back and look at the last 5 years, we're negative. Go back and look at the last 10 years, we're negative. Go back and look at the last 20 years, we're negative. You know, go back and look at the last 21 years where I gave us an advantage of a 4-1 extra record, and we're still fucking negative. And I don't want to go back any further than that. You might be like, well, why don't you go back any further? You know, if you go back, you know, somebody could go do their research and be like, well, if you go back an extra 3 years, we actually have a positive record. I wanted to do about 20 years because I figured that's when the more modern NFL has been adopted. Now, of course, the Chicago Bears haven't adopted a modern NFL offense. We don't have a 4,000-yard passer, and we don't have a 30-touchdown passer. But still, I don't know. I think we need a dome. I think it just makes too much financial sense, and I think it just makes overall just too much sense. I'm not trying to call out all Bears fans, right? Not all Bears fans are like this, but it is annoying when I see fans being annoying because we don't want a dome. We think dome's bad. Bad dome. We're the Buffalo Bills of the NFC. No, we're not. We're just not. You know, they have built their team to survive the cold, but play in other weather as well. We haven't built our team at all. We have still so many question marks surrounding our team and what exactly this team is going to be. There's one more thing I want to add, and I'm recording this after I got done with my full script. This is something that I was thinking about afterwards as I was kind of editing this video together in a way. Is the fact that you could definitely break this down more. I don't think I went over this enough near the end of the video. You could definitely break down the Chicago Bears cold weather games a lot more than what I had done. You know, you could do a lot more. You could, like, one of my thoughts was you could go in and you could, you know, find the average of the offense that year before the cold weather games, and then you could compare it to the offense of the cold weather games when they lose, when they win, the cold weather defense. You could do everything in your power. You know, if it hits this degree in temperature, do they win or do they lose more? You could break it down by game, you could break it down by season, you could do a whole ton more of in-depth statistic looking than what I've done. I've just took it at its base look, at its most just base level information, which is wins and losses. If I had all the time in the world, I would love to do a project like this to see truly whether or not the Chicago Bears have been better in cold weather games. You know, Is it their offense? Is it their defense over the last 20 years? Is it just the other teams being better? Do teams play better against us at home? Are they not bothered by the cold? Or are we bothered by the cold? You could look at so many different stats. Like, that's one thing I would want to really look at and dig into is, does it affect the other team's players enough? Not even just like, do we have, a better offense or a better defense when it's cold out? Does their offense, does their defense get affected when they are at our home stadium and when it is cold out? I think that's one thing that I would like to look at, right? Because it's not really, whether or not our offense or defense plays better in cold weather. It's more about if their offense and defense don't play better in cold weather when they're playing on the lake in those December games when it's 5 degrees out, and then with the wind and everything it's -10. Does that make a true difference? Are those players really being impacted by the weather, or is it not really as big of an issue and they're playing just as fine in the cold weather as we are and we're just losing games? All these different things. Like I've said before, like I said earlier in the video, yes, the teams were bad during these last couple of years. Even with Lovie Smith, the team still wasn't great. We had a couple good seasons in there, but the team still wasn't great. It wasn't the best team ever assembled. Under John Fox and Mark Trestman, those were some of the shittiest years we've ever fucking experienced. You could definitely look at it and say, okay, well, is the team more to blame than the weather? All this different stuff. But I think this is just the most base level form of this. Looking at it, this is the most base level form. But, that's just my opinion, I guess. If you guys enjoy this content or any of the content here on my channel, I know this is a little bit different. I don't know exactly what's going to be playing in the video background. I still haven't decided on that. I'm just recording this so I can get my ass in gear and get this video out. So hopefully you guys do enjoy whatever's playing in the background as well. But like I said, if you guys enjoy this content or the content here on my channel, I would appreciate it if you guys do stick around and subscribe. I'll be back with more videos like this. I have another Bears video planned, the prediction video. I have a top 5 franchises video for Madden 25, and then I'll have a bunch of other content coming out as well, hopefully. With that being said, guys, like I said, if you guys enjoy this content, please stick around and subscribe. And I'll be back with more videos like this. But with that being said, I'm out. Peace.